Welcome to Engaging Aging. I'm Erin DiCarlo.
And I'm Lauren Watts.
We believe life gets richer with age, and we're here to prove it.
We bring you real conversations about aging well, living fully, and navigating this journey with confidence.
So let's dive in, because aging isn't something to endure, it's something to embrace. Welcome back to Engaging Aging. We are so excited for today's special guest. We're joined by Kimberly Napier. She is not only an incredible coach, author, but she's also our own first business coach who has helped us really step into our power and thrive with our business here at Dovetail. Kimberly is the creator of Dare Change Method and the best-selling author of Know What You Want Next. Break free of the I don't know trap, and also Elevated. Take your life to the next level. She's here today to share her insights on how older adults, especially those of you who may be feeling stuck or uncertain, how you can make some empowering shifts in your life to discover what you truly want next. So we are so excited for this conversation. Thank you for joining us.
This has been a long time coming.
Yes.
So exciting.
I'm so excited to be here.
So I was thinking this morning, I think the first ever podcast I listened to was you and Catherine's podcast. I remember being like, oh, a podcast. What is this thing? And that was probably, 6 or 7 years ago. What is the name of your podcast?
Manifesting Mastery.
There it is. Yeah. I remember it. I'll have to check it back out.
Absolutely.
So without further ado, we obviously know you personally, but professionally, you've shared your story with the world through your amazing books and your coaching and your different speaking engagements. We'd love for the listeners to know a little bit about your background and what brought you to this world of coaching and being an author.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I always laugh because, people don't just wake up one day and become a coach. Something happens in life. And for me, it happened about almost 13 years ago. I was living a very different life and I was in the corporate world. I thought that I would stay there and retire and that would be my path. And I was thrown a curveball with the sudden death of my husband to suicide when my girls were just 8 and 10 and my whole world was turned upside down. So it was really a moment where I thought, I don't know how I'm going to go forward. And I did because, that's just kind of what we do is we
have to.
We just move through it. And it left me in a place, though, where I really was feeling broken and unfulfilled at work. And I went through this journey of everything just seemed to be falling apart, and in a matter of months, I lost my husband, my dad, and my my older daughter went into anaphylactic shock on Christmas Day. And I just got to the place where I had to surrender to God and say, I can't do this anymore. Please save my daughter and I'll do anything. Just give me a sign. And that night, thank God, she was okay. And I went home that night and I just decided that I'm going to live with gratitude going forward because I had lost so much, but I still had so much. But I still went back to work because even though it wasn't fulfilling for me anymore, I felt like I had to, like it was what I needed to do. And when I was in the boardroom a couple months later, I got a sign from God, I believe. And I literally heard a voice inside that told me to leave. It was like a get out, which sounds crazy. And it did seem crazy at the time, but I couldn't unhear it. And I heard it twice, in fact, and I got up and I left my corporate job that day without a plan.
And I think it's important for people to know you didn't just have an average corporate job. You were extremely successful, upper management, running teams, international organization, like very high power position. This wasn't something like this. This message was so clear that this was a big deal, but you knew you had to do it.
Absolutely. I had been in this career for 22 years. I was head of global insights for a major iconic brand. And I just got up that day and I left and I went and told my boss, he's like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No." And I had this voice inside that said, no, I need to leave. I need to be home with my girls. And I know I'm meant to help other women who have gone through what I've been through. And I left that day without a plan. But it was like I had this knowing inside that I was meant to do something different. And I trusted it. I'd never felt that in my life before.
Was that scary for you?
You know, it's so funny because it should have been, but it wasn't. It was like when it happened, I wasn't scared. But then I did have this moment where I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing?
So like looking back, it was divine intervention
Totally.
and just gratitude for that moment too.
Absolutely.
Of that connection.
And then it was as if the universe just dropped these breadcrumbs and it led me to positive psychology. I won't get into that whole story because that's a longer story, but I found it about a month later and I knew that was what I was meant to do. And I was meant to go there to help me and my girls heal. And we did. You know, we had been doing traditional methods of therapy and it was helping a bit. But what I realized was I was ready to give myself permission to live again. And I felt like that was my purpose after my husband had taken his life. I had to show my kids how to live and choose life.
That's
and
beautiful.
so I threw myself into that.
That's beautiful. That I had to show my girls how to live.
Yeah.
And I think so many of us don't know how to give ourselves permission. We get stuck in whatever that emotion is, whether it's grief or overwhelm or whatever, and people don't know how to take one tiny step forward to get through that. And positive psychology gave you the tools, it sounds like, to start to reshape some of the mindset and find the motivation to do the hard thing to ultimately live your life.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And, you know, it was also just permission to feel joy again. Because after loss, I think it's hard for us sometimes to allow that. And there's so much that other people are projecting onto you about how you should be grieving and how you should be feeling. And there was a moment where my children said to me, it was basically after my dad died, a month after my husband died, they said, Mom, why is all this bad stuff happening to us? Are we bad? And in that moment, I knew that I had to show them that they were worthy of joy and love and peace and living again. And so it kind of got my, if I can swear a little bit, my ass in gear.
Yeah, please.
And I was like, I'm not feeling joyful, but I have to be joyful. Like I have to choose it to show them and model for them that that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the beautiful philosophies, and maybe we'll dive into a little bit more today, like feel it before it exists.
It's like
And
fake it till you make it a little bit.
Yes.
It might
We
even
say
feel
face
inauthentic.
it till you make it.
Face it till you
Face it
make
till you make it.
That's good.
You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You got to
gotta
go through it.
Absolutely,
Right.
you do.
So tell us about, so you have this experience, you start using these modalities and this education and training in positive psychology with yourself and your girls. At what point did you say, this can be a profession, like the coaching could be my thing?
Right away, actually. And I will actually say, I said that even before I went to the class, because I've always been, I guess, a provider in a way. Like I knew I wasn't going to stay home forever. Like I had to find something. And before I even went into positive psychology, I had gone on this little journey to find myself again. And I kept hearing, you should be a coach. You should be a coach. And this was almost, 14 years ago, 13, that coaches weren't really a thing in Massachusetts.
Yeah, it was new.
So
West Coast. That was a West Coast
exactly.
thing.
So that's what
Yeah.
I said. So that's a California thing.
Yeah.
Like they're not going to buy that in Massachusetts. So it was sort of in the back of my mind. And then when I got to the class, which I was in a year-long certification, I just knew this was what I was meant to do.
Yeah.
It just really clicked. So really right away.
And to any listeners that have been to our educational events and you've heard Lauren and I talk about positive psychology, that all came from after being coached by Kimberly. And she brought together that this is an actual, neuroscience and methodology that works. And so we've been using positive psychology approaches with our older adult clients for at least 6 years since we met you, and it's been a life changer. So if any of that is of interest to you,
Yeah.
we'll make sure we connect with those
And
resources.
it's interesting too. It truly is a daily practice. You can't just pick up a book and think, oh, I'm magically cured. I'm living in a state of gratitude every single day of my life. It is a constant
It's a
check-in
moment
with
by
yourself
Yes.
Yeah.
to say, how can I change this thought process for myself, right?
Yes. And gratitude is in so many ways, it's a tool to make you feel better. But for me, I feel like it really saved me because it enabled me to really shift my reality and look at what I did have. And I think that's the key thing, is that we get so stuck in what we don't have. And the difference between psychology and positive psychology, it's really the same thing, but we've made psychology pathology. What's wrong with you? Whereas positive psychology looks at what is right with you.
Yes, and build upon that.
And that's how we thrive and flourish, is when we're able to build upon our strengths and look at what is working in our world. What is something that I can build upon, right? And what do I appreciate? That's when you get more to appreciate. And that's when you really start to attract things. When we talk about manifesting, that's when we're always manifesting all the time, right? But what are we manifesting from? If you're able to get into that deep state of appreciation, then you're actually going to attract more of what you do want.
Yes.
And it really is that simple.
Yeah. And I want to be clear. This isn't like Pollyanna. We're asking everybody to like fake that they're happy out there. This is showing reverence. Yes, we understand what's not working, but then shifting your attention to what is and how to have more of that. For many of our older adult clients, sometimes the first time I met you was at a women's business conference or something, and you asked everyone in the group, what is something that brings you joy? And it can't be your spouse or your kids or your work. Like what's the personal thing that brings you joy? And I will never forget sitting in Waltham in that boardroom and really welling up with tears because I couldn't answer the question. I really couldn't answer the question. And now that we ask our clients these questions, like, what's the thing? I know that there's a lot going on. You've lost a spouse or you're dealing with a recent diagnosis. What is something that brings you joy? And oftentimes they also can't answer that question. And so I had to, because you prompted us, if you can't think of something, think about earlier in your life. What was something, an activity or a hobby or something that brought you joy earlier in your life? And I immediately knew my answer was time in the barn with horses, which was my childhood growing up. But I hadn't connected in that way with horses in 20 plus years until you asked that question. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Like how do you start when you're working with your clients or people who are just feeling stuck? Tell us a little bit about some of your approaches and your philosophies to this work.
Yeah. Well, I just want to also add to that it's so common what you just stated, that we don't know what brings us joy. We can lose connection with that over time, especially as women, because we take care of so many other people, whether it's children or employees. We can get lost in that and we get on autopilot and we disconnect from ourselves and also from like what gives us joy and even wanting. And so a lot of times when people come to me, they don't know what they want next. They just know what they don't want and they feel lost, they feel like they just, they used to know what they wanted, but now they don't know. And it's because they are disconnected from themselves. So much of our work is really about reconnecting with them and where they are now and allowing that to start to be enough, that it's, who am I now? And once you're able to answer that, then the clarity comes. But so often we're always trying to figure it out. Like, well, what do I want? What do I want to do next? And we're not able to really see the big picture because we're so lost from ourselves. We're almost like living outside of ourselves.
We identify as that role. So it's like, who am I? I'm a mother. No, that's not who I am at my core soul being. Who am I? I'm a wife. Still not there yet. Who am I? I'm a business partner with Lauren. Nope. It's like we are so identified with the roles in which we play in our life that to come back to self is the answer.
Yeah.
I know from personal experience working with you, that is challenging to come out of the chaos of every role that you are, what you're living, the environment around you, the noise that's around you from other people. It took me a really long time to actually go very deep inside to know who is that little girl inside of me, who is Lauren, and what does bring her joy? What does she still need as a 40-plus-year-old woman? And really honor that and really be close to that. Like it brought up so many emotions. I remember being in Sedona with you. The tears were flowing moment after moment because it was like for the first time, it's really hard. And I say it to Erin all the time. It's so easy for someone to say, journal what you're feeling right now, journal what you desire to have. until you can sit in that silence and remove that chaos, I couldn't come out of it. I could not give you a very quick answer, whereas I think other times people can.
Yeah, I'd love to know if you could give a little tip. If there's a listener later in life listening to this, and that question, they feel a little stumped, what are some self-prompts that they could really start to go inward a little bit and reconnect with that self?
Well, I think both of you brought up some really good points. One is getting still and like letting yourself have that space. I think we're so uncomfortable in that space, but that's really where you have to go, in that discomfort, and be with yourself. And we're always, busy and doing other things or filling our time, and we avoid it. But letting yourself sit with yourself and reconnecting with that little girl, whatever. It could be your 20-year-old self. It could be your 30-year-old self. It could be your 5-year-old self. And letting her be heard and seen and witnessing her. And that's sometimes hard to do. But often in those moments, we get the insights that we need. It's just getting in that stillness. And, if you can't bring up your younger self, call in other reinforcements, whether you believe in God or source or the universe, allow in your guides to help you with that. But it is starting with, allowing yourself that space to just connect and go inward.
That's beautiful.
I also want to offer our audience too, I think sometimes it's okay just to know that maybe you can't do it on your own. Like I could not do it on my own. I needed someone else to help me through that, because I was always second guessing, calling in those guides. What am I hearing? What am I seeing? Is this accurate? Is this my mind taking over versus what I truly want? So it wasn't until really started working with you and your network of really opening up and going deep inside. Like I could never get quiet. Someone would say to me, "Oh, meditate? What's meditation?" I couldn't. It's like folding my legs and crossing my arms and opening my palms. I couldn't do that. I couldn't be in that stillness and that silence. And it's not like I come from a lot of trauma, but there were things that I just couldn't go there.
I think one thing we hear a lot too is people are afraid to go there. They're like, oh no, there's too much pain or grief or skeletons in my own closet that I just have to remain buttoned up to not allow the things to come. And what I say is those things are already there, causing you behind the scenes pain. It can only get better when open and lifted.
Yeah. And so much of it is just shutting off your brain and getting into your heart, right? Because our mind can be very deceptive, and it's always looking for what is wrong, because it's wired for negativity bias.
Survival, yeah.
So we're always looking for that. So if you can even just drop into your heart center and just sit in that, and from that place, you will get a different guidance. That's where you can really receive information. I think about meditation more about receiving than clearing. So clearing can be hard, especially if you're a type A and you like to get things done, and it's hard to shut your brain off. But if you can just imagine that when you go in, you're actually going to get the clarity you need. You ask a question and it's going to come to you. It's just in that stillness, it'll catch up with you.
Yes.
So, but I don't usually start people off with meditation. Back to positive psychology, I usually start people off with working with their mindset, because it feels more tangible and it's a baby step, and so starting to shift your perspective to just even saying, okay, I know that things aren't perfect in my world and there's a lot that's not going right, but I'm going to invest in looking at what is going well. What is one thing that's going well right now, and allowing yourself to have that, even in spite of everything else. Because the more you do that, you're creating that neural pathway to look for the good, and then you will start to see more of it. We've all had that experience. I think we were talking about before about peacocks, staring at peacocks and thinking about peacocks. And then all of a sudden there's one on the road in front of Lauren. It's like, wow, well, your brain is looking for the evidence of whatever we're feeding it. So if we're feeding it all the time things that aren't working or what's not going well, that's what we're going to see. But if we start to look at, well, let's balance it out and say, well, what is going well? What is the best case scenario here? You'll start to see that more. So that's usually where I start people. And a great way to do that is through gratitude. What are you grateful for? What are the blessings in your life? Because you can always find things that are not there.
So when I started working with you, my third daughter, Lucia, this child, everyone, to all my listeners who had children that didn't sleep, She never slept. We were in Boston Children's Hospital, the Ferber Clinic, for like a year. I was so sleep deprived. I started Dovetail during that time. Started this company with a sleep deprived infant, and I was so exhausted and overwhelmed. And all I could think about was the fact that my child never slept. And you said, what I'd like you to start doing every night before you go to bed, write down 3 things about her. 3 positive things from the day. 3 things about Lucia that you were grateful for, that I loved, that went well. Because there was an animosity building within me for my own child because I just couldn't figure it out. And I like to be successful at figuring things out. And within like a week, it was like, okay, to your point, when you start to pay attention and have gratitude for what is working and where the blessings are, it didn't take away. By the way, she didn't just start miraculously sleeping through the night. It didn't cure that. That came over time. But the energy went in a different direction. And ultimately, yes, she did start sleeping through the night, probably also because I wasn't focused on her not sleeping.
It changed the way you were with her.
Yes, which now we know about the nervous system. Like we are literally sharing our energy and our nervous system with our children. So there's some practical, and I think Lauren and I do this with our clients, so often when we're coming into a client situation, maybe they've been to the doctor or a visiting nurse has come or their children are reminding them and focusing what's not wrong, what's unsafe in their home, what are they not successful at doing. And many times we're the first person in their life to say, we actually don't care about that. We'll get to that. What works well for you here? What do you love about being in your home? What would you like to do more of? And you can see the shift in our clients immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you can also see the shift in their primary caregivers or their family members when you do focus on the positive versus focusing on what's not working well. In terms of how do we now make a plan to move forward, right? I'm sure with your daughters, when you decided, I'm going to take a positive psychology approach, and they said to you, why do all these bad things happen to us? How quickly did you see a change in them when you were practicing gratitude on a daily basis that they didn't feel that way anymore?
Oh, instantly.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's amazing. It's powerful.
Yeah.
So tell us about, so we have really 2 types of clients and probably 2 types of listeners here. We have adult children who sometimes contact us. They're feeling overwhelmed. They're in like this caregiver squeeze burnout. There's a lot of guilt and shame over, back to your point, I should feel a certain way, or I should do this for mom and dad, or whatever it is. And then we have the older adult themselves, where we really try to help clear out all that noise from the influencers. But the feeling of being stuck is the reason probably we get the phone call. So expand upon a little bit about maybe why humans get stuck, or like, this is not just for younger generations. It's just a human experience. What is it about us as humans that we just get stuck?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think that we really are stuck. I think that is the story that we tell ourselves. And usually it's because we don't know what to do. So it's not that we don't know what we want to do or what would work even, but we're often afraid of making the step because we don't know if it's the right one, or we're going to fail, or we're going to look bad, or something. We don't know what the next thing is. So I work with a lot of women, and often they're overthinkers, and high achievers are usually overthinkers. So there's this, well, if I do that, then what about this? And then what if this happens? And we kind of go down that road, like we have to have everything figured out.
Just to take the step.
Just to take the first step. And so the easiest thing is to just take that first step. But usually we don't have the courage to do that because we have become disconnected from ourselves. So to me, it all goes back to a sense of self and really understanding who you are now and who you want to be. And once you start to figure that out, the rest of it starts to figure itself out.
What happens when people, I'm asking an obvious question, but when we start to do the work, when we gain clarity, when we start to focus on self and find out what we need and start to take aligned action, what can sometimes happen to those around us?
I feel like you know the answer to this one, right?
I mean, we see it with the adult daughters. They're like, whoa, 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 what's going on with mom?
She's acting different. And so I always tell people because sometimes I have, someone come to me for coaching that has been prompted by a loved one. And I will often say to them, well, just know that things are going to be different going forward. And then they're like, wait, what happened? I often coach younger people who their parents are like, well, wait a minute, why don't they want to go to college? Like, that's not what they want. So they start thinking on their own, and people don't always like that because the patterns are breaking that they have had with their loved ones. And
what do they say? We'll always choose the familiar hell over the unfamiliar, like joy, because it keeps us safe, right?
Absolutely. Like a baby will stay with an abusive mother because it's what they know and that's their comfort. Yep. And so we stay in our comfort zones as well, and we have to, and that's all what this is like learning how to break free of those survival patterns.
But it's so freeing. I mean, we've seen people in their 80s or 90s do the work and literally thrive later in life. Like
it's never too late.
It's not over until it's over. Yeah.
No.
And why not, to our listeners, like, what do you have to lose? You've done the other way your whole life. How is it serving you? If it's not great, let's live our best life,
Yeah. And, I would say too, if they start changing, they might inspire their loved ones, inspire their children to make changes. And I usually tell my clients too, if you want to make a change in your life and you're afraid to, I always think about, well, what would you tell your child to do? Because we're always modeling, right? We're always modeling for people. And our children look at what we do, not what we say. So they will follow that. So there's always an opportunity to lead by example.
And that's such a better gift to future generations than leaving money in a trust fund. Like, let's change these generational patterns. We know that trauma exists and is passed on through families. Do the work now and stop that for future generations and show them the right path
break
forward.
The patterns.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's beautiful. Lauren, what are your thoughts around, like you said, you've been through this, you felt stuck, you've been kind of doing the work. When you, either family members or friends, say to you, because you've gotten very clear in your life, you're a very determined woman in many ways. It's an honor to be along this journey with you.
Thank you.
Like, how do you apply this in your own life?
I think for me, one of the biggest things, and this is in your book, is really just trusting your choices. Like gaining clarity, becoming so aligned with yourself, and just trusting we have all the answers inside, right? I used to go outside all of the time for answers. People, everybody, what do you think about this? When I knew that answer inside. And it's amazing to see this shift with coworkers, family members, friends, when you have that confidence in what you want and what you know and how to voice that. Like I said before, it takes a lot of time. It is minute by minute work, right? It doesn't happen overnight. This is something that you do. So it's trusting those choices, but it's also continuously gaining clarity. I don't think we all know what we want here 5 years out or here 2 days out, but kind of constantly evaluating that self. So I think it's the work. It's showing up for yourself, and it's constantly asking yourself those questions and gaining clarity.
Yeah. And I think it's better not to know it all, because
Yes.
I really think we limit ourselves if we try to. And I always lived that way, very prescriptive, like I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And I still make plans, but I don't have it all figured out. And I don't think we should, because I know from my own experience, having really reinvented my life, it played out better than I thought it ever could, by just allowing myself to be present in the moment and allowing things to come to me and make choices when I'm in it instead of when I'm, living in the future.
Yeah.
And that's spontaneous. That's joy. I mean, I think when we let go of the reins, let go and let God, or just let go and allow things, it happens with much more ease. I think that's one thing we try to do with our clients is dream. And I say, literally, rainbows and butterflies here, like ideal scenario. What do you want to see for yourself? And when we allow ourselves to dream and let go of the reins, there's a lot of that they tell me that we can make a reality. There's a plan to make that happen.
Yeah.
But we just keep ourselves in this bubble that most people don't even think that these things are options.
It's so beautiful that you give them that permission, because I think often we are waiting for that. We're waiting for that permission to allow ourselves to dream.
It's so interesting. Prior to walking into this conversation today, I was on the phone with a client, and she's out of state right now, moving in state to be closer to her 2 adult children. And she said to me, I am scared about making this transition. And I said, why? And it was the fear of the unknown on the other side, right? But second to that, it was the fear that her sons were making this decision for her and that she didn't have her autonomy and she wasn't making this decision. Right now, where she is in her life, she's not able to come and see where she's moving to next. And so she doesn't know what this is going to look like, right? So it's a lot of conversation. It's a lot of kind of helping her through this process. And what I said to her was, this doesn't have to be final. This is not the end all be all, right? So you're going to come, you're going to experience it. You're going to have an open heart. You're going to have an open mind, and know that every step of the way you are remaining in control of your decisions. You are at the driver's seat, and you can change the course at any point in time that you want to, as long as you are continuing to be honest with yourself, focusing in on what you want next, and voicing that to other people and be very, very confident with that. And we hung up the phone and she was like, thank you so much. It was like that breath of fresh air of just the validation that this may not be easy. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen.
But we can pivot.
But we can pivot at any moment in time. This is not set in stone. And that's the beauty, I think, of anything in life. We can go through and we can make a wrong decision. And in that moment, we can say, okay, that wasn't the way that this was supposed to go. How am I going to pivot and how am I going to do this while finding gratitude along the way?
You know, and I just want to add to that, because this is one of the things that I find holds people back the most, is that idea of uncertainty and forgetting that they can change their mind. It's like set in stone. And a lot of people are afraid to make a decision because they don't know what it's going to look like. And am I going to like this better than what I have now? And how's it going to affect everyone? And there's just so many what ifs. And
but to your point, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You can always go back to what it was
But
before.
a lot of people don't see that. So I think reassuring them that, yes, like you can change your mind. I always tell my clients to have a plan B in the back of their mind. You may never, ever need it.
But it'll give you peace of mind.
But it will give you the courage to make the leap into your plan A.
Yes.
And so whether that's, you know, I could always go back to the corporate world, or I could always move back here, or, you know, whatever that is, just have it in the back of your mind. It's just there. It's your safety net, but it gives you the courage to take the leap. And the other thing is just reminding ourselves that we're at choice, because so often we just don't think we're at choice. We think that, you know, we have to stay the course, and we don't see a way out. And why I really got into this work was because I lived that way for most of my life on autopilot, like not thinking I really had a choice to change my life. Like, this is the life I chose. I got to stick with it. It's got to be this way. And in my journey, because my world fell apart, I was able to make so many different choices. Like, I had the permission, but so many of us don't give ourselves that permission because we're afraid of letting others down.
So many people say they feel bad. They think they're complaining. Well, my situation isn't that bad. I shouldn't complain because my friend Mary's husband has dementia, and at least Bob doesn't, or whatever.
Right.
It's like, no, also the permission that there's no comparison of struggle or trauma, that whatever you're experiencing, it's okay for that to be hard. And like, we're here in witness of it. I think another beautiful thing for people to remember is like, start practicing this with other people in your life. Like, if we're understanding that it's so important that we be given permission to do the things we want to do that for others. Like, start by, when you hear someone saying, I shouldn't do this or I couldn't do that, be the one to say, why not? Go for it. Try it. Do the thing.
Yeah.
We elevate, all of us, when we shift that energy as a collective. And I know, obviously, we have a completely disempowered group of humans in America, and it's older adults. You've heard me say this on this podcast once. You've heard me say it a million times. Ageism, I believe, is like one of the last socially acceptable forms of prejudice in our country. And so we have to raise this collective vibration and awareness of like, you can do what you want. You are an adult. And when you enlist the right support and professionals and making informed decisions, yes, do the thing. Let's give each other permission to live fully later in life. I love all of that, especially for obviously our audience, which is exciting.
So Kimberly, I want to dive in because we talked a little bit about this before in a separate conversation. So many of us have spent so much of our lives planning for our retirement, right? Like working, being a mom, being a caregiver, being a daughter, being a son, whatever it is. And you plan for your retirement and the grandiose things that you're going to be doing in your retirement. And then that day comes and you're here. And for a lot of our listeners, it may feel in alignment with them that they are in post-retirement stage and they are not living that retirement life that they thought that they would be, or something has changed with their spouse or a loved one where they're now stepping into a caregiver role and there's resentment. Can we, how do you work with people, one, to focus on what does retirement look like? And if it's not what they thought it was going to be, or they're stepping into a different role, can you talk a little bit about the power of your work and how it helps people get back on track with who they are and what they want?
Yeah, well, and I would just start by saying that retirement is often not what we think it's going to be because we've been trained in society to work, and almost be in the rat race and, save and give up our life in our younger years so that we can finally rest and relax and have fun in our older years. But the challenge with that is both scenarios do not create happiness. And what the science shows is that happiness comes from an intersection of pleasure and meaning. And so if we're only focused on meaning, we lack that pleasure. And then we get into our older years and it's just pleasure. I get to golf, I get to relax, I get to check out. We're missing the meaning and the challenge in our day. So we need both to feel purpose. And that's what really leads to longevity and happiness in our life. So one of the things that we work on right away is, we talked a little bit about identity. It's like, who am I without this job? And really starting to understand who that person is. And then secondly, really finding purpose in the day. Even if it's simple, like I'm going to meditate for, 10 minutes a day. I'm going to go and volunteer here, twice a week, like finding things in your life that will give you that meaning because that is what's missing often.
We always say, too, from a caregiver perspective, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first. You cannot show up for that person 24 hours a day, deplete yourself. You have to fill your cup. So what are those things that are going to allow you to fill your cup? And sometimes it's bringing in additional support systems, right, for you to be able to tag out. If you're a primary caregiver, you can't do that. Whereas if your loved one is in a community or in a different setting, or you have support with home care, it allows you to refill your tank to then come back to the situation better than you left it,
we see this
right?
so much with couples. So there's this assumption, societal and more familial, of like, until death do us part means I have to literally take care of you bedside until you take your last breath. And what we know is that caregiver burnout is real, that the quote unquote healthy caregiver typically has a faster decline and a quicker death because they're not meeting their own needs. And so what we try to talk a lot about, and this is where they get stuck because they can't answer the question, if you fill your bucket, to Lauren's point, you're going to not only be a better advocate and caregiver, but the professionals, like by subbing out caregiving, the loved one is receiving better care.
Yes.
Because that caregiver gets to go home and unplug and rest and come back fresh. They also don't have the emotional dynamics and strain that you have with your caregiver. But again, it's this permission. It's like someone needs to say. And so when I'm assuming when you reconnect with self, you have the ability to give yourself permission to say, I see you, I hear you, self. and I got you, and you can do
Yes.
this.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate to this intimately with my mother because my sister and my brother and I all took care of her, and then we did have a caregiver. And, you know, I know from all three of us, we were not at our best when we were doing it 24/7.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And bringing in someone else to help was essential. And, you know, it enabled me to enjoy my time with her versus just feel almost resentful that I had to do everything. But I do think that the guilt and the shame can come in too. Like you feel like you have to, or you
Yep.
should be the one, but you need to give yourself those breaks and allow yourself to have that space to reconnect with yourself, and then you will be better for them too.
It's so interesting. We find that caregivers identify so strongly with the role of caregiver, especially the ones that didn't do the work to tag out and get additional support and help. And sometimes caregiving, especially with Alzheimer's disease, can be decades, years at least, sometimes decades long, that by not doing that work, by not separating and filling your own bucket after the loss of that loved one, there is a deep, deep feeling of who am I if I am not a caregiver? And so doing this work is not only good in the moment for you to show up better and fully and wholly for your loved one, but it's going to save you lots of emotional trauma and grief after the fact by doing the work ahead of time. We do a decent amount of end-of-life planning, I would say. We have an end-of-life planning workshop, and people do get pretty clear. We do have a meditation. We have a visioning at the beginning where people are able to vision their death experience. And then we have a workshop that helps that a plan to make that a reality for end of life. And it's interesting to me how people can pretty clearly explain, like they can say, oh, I have a will. Like I know what I want when I'm gone. I know what I want death to be. But what about this period in between where you will be living? And that is that stuck point. And I love that you bring the wisdom and resources and process and knowledge to help our older adult clients really get unstuck, because that's what this is about. It's about living while you're here in whatever way that means, and not letting your diagnosis define you. Like Lauren and I always say, just because you've been given a diagnosis of whatever the thing is, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, you at your core are still there. And even more importantly, because of diagnosis, not in spite of it, how do we help you at this point live fully?
What's interesting with that end of life planning workshop that I have seen in the last few times that we've done it are the couple scenarios, the husband and wife. And you go back to the death do us part, they feel as though they have a plan that they're always going to be together. But then at the end, you get one of them that comes up and says, I don't know what to do because my idea of what the next chapter looks like for us is completely different than what the chapter looks like for him. And I don't know how to separate that. I don't know how to have the conversation. I don't know how to get deep with myself of what that looks like. And so we're just going to stay home and we're going to remain stuck and we're going to be miserable and talk about that purpose and what you need to make yourself happy. It's like they can't even go to finding gratitude because they're just going to remain where they are. And then what does that do for you? You know, it's just like in that situation, how would you look at two people to help them really? Can you do it together, or do you have to do it separately to really identify what you want next for yourself and then bring that together?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, you have to, this is where gratitude can come in too, right? Like it's not the ideal scenario, but if I love you, I'm going to look for what I am grateful for about you, and I'm going to focus on that with you, but I also am a whole person. And I think this goes for any relationship. You have to work on yourself individually, and then you work on also it's almost like there's another entity, right? Which is the partnership.
Yes.
But there are three entities here. There's each individual, and then there is the marriage. So all of those need to be thriving in some way. So you need to be investing in yourself to be able to, as we talked about, be fully there for the other person, but you can't do just one or the other. It has to be both.
Right.
Yeah.
And we hear, well, he's never going to change, blah, blah. So I'm not going to do anything. Because, like, what's the point? And what we all know from doing this work is when we do the work for
change.
ourselves, there's a follow that happens.
Yes.
There's an energetic shift.
There's always a change.
There's a change. So I love the name
Someone
of your...
has to step up.
Yes. I love the name of
Yes.
your program, Dare Change. It's eloquent and beautiful. How can people get in touch with you if this is really landing for people and they're ready to kind of like tiptoe into it or dive into it? Tell us a little bit about how people can learn more or connect with you.
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is KimberlyNapier.com, and you can get a free download of my book there. You can also get it on Amazon and Audible. And you can, on my website, also find ways to work with me. If you're interested, you can book a complimentary session to learn more about coaching. And then also learn about my events and retreats, which you guys have done before.
Life-changing, life-changing. Yes. We cannot recommend Kimberly high enough, not just for us personally and professionally, but this overall empowerment for older adults to not be stuck. Like, please take the step, and hopefully we can have some events together. That would be fun. Some
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah,
virtual or in-person events to take this out to the masses. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Thank you
Appreciate
guys
it.
so much.
Appreciate
It's
it.
wonderful to be here and see you guys.
Thank
Can't
you.
wait to continue the conversation.
Thank you for joining us today. We love having these conversations, and we hope they sparked something for you too. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and share it with your community, because together we can change the way the world sees aging. You can find us at dovetailcompanies.com or on any of our social media channels at Dovetail Companies. And just a quick note, the opinions shared in this podcast are those of our guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Engaging Aging, Dovetail Companies, or our team. So until we see you next time, keep engaging with aging.